Yo, 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 what is up everybody? Popo here bringing you guys a new video, and today we're going to be talking about the top 10 Pokemon that dropped off from Sword and Shield. Let's go. Welcome everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the top 10 Pokemon that dropped off from Sword and Shield. Now, these are going to be Pokemon that really excelled in this Dynamax format that we had, and have not been seen almost at all coming into the Scarlet and Violet game. Of course, the qualifications have to be that the Pokemon is in the game, so we can't say something like Tapu Fini has dropped off because it just doesn't exist in the game. So this is going to be a list that the order can be argued, and I had a really hard time kind of ordering this list, and I don't know if this is the correct order. But I felt good about it. I felt good about it, especially the top three. I felt really good about. But this list, you could kind of change it up if you really want to. But I think that these are the clear Pokemon that really have dropped off going into Sword and Shield, or going into Scarlet and Violet. My apologies. From Sword and Shield, who we saw a bunch of formats where some Pokemon did extremely well, even though they seemed like they wouldn't have otherwise, and some of those Pokemon showed that they definitely shouldn't have. So let's get right onto the list. So at number 10, we have Regigigas. Of course, Regigigas really excelled with that Wheezing core. We even saw it into the single restricted formats. It did really well at some of the Players' Cups, and it was just a really strong attacker. Of course, the Dynamax attack, normal attack, would lower the speed of your opponents, so that was really, really strong. It also ran a Dark attack often to lower the special defense of the Pokemon, so it could, so your back Pokemon can come in and really handle those. So there was a lot that this Pokemon could do, but it was almost always going to be your Dynamax option. And yeah, with its stats, Life Orb, everything like that, it was just very, very strong. And when you were matching up against a team like this, you had to go for something like Will-O-Wisp to really deal with it. And next to the Wheezing, really shut off your abilities. It's why it paired really well with Calyrex Shadow Rider. They didn't share weaknesses either. That really helped propel it. So Regigigas, we have not seen at all in Scarlet and Violet. I know some people have tried it, and it just hasn't had any results. I thought maybe we might see it with that Calyrex going into this newer format, because of course Calyrex does not get its ability stop from Wheezing, but no, we did not see it, and continue to not see it, so maybe it'll make a comeback, but I doubt it. So that is number 10, it is Regigigas. Going into number 9, we have the Rotom Heat. There was a point in Sword and Shield where Rotom Heat was just dominating the format. It might not have put up results. Of course, there weren't tournaments going on around this time when this thing was dominating, but it did do pretty okay at some of the Players' Cups, so it has that going for it, but it was just such a strong attacker. People are running a multitude of items on it, including Citrus Berry, Choice Specs. We even had Choice Scarf variations, and this Pokemon was just clicking Overheat. It was sometimes clicking Heat Wave, Thunderbolt, so it had really good coverage, especially into the meta at the time. And of course, with Levitate, it lost one of its weaknesses, meaning that Water and Rock were the only things threatening this. And at that time, those weren't really super common. So it was able to really take over a format just for a little bit, even if it was for a little bit. But in Scarlet and Violet, we never saw this Pokemon. We saw a little bit of Rotom Wash, and I even saw Rotom Leaf do pretty good. Rotom Mow, I think it's called. I always call it Leaf. But we never saw Rotom Heat really reach any pinnacle again, and it has just been kind of a meh Pokemon, and yeah, I think it'll continue to be a pretty meh Pokemon going forward. Going into number 8, we have Dusclops. Dusclops, at one point in Sword and Shield, was the premier Trick Room setter. It just couldn't be one-shot by anything in the game, so it was just really, really strong. It helped set up some of your things like your Glacier. It was really popular using with that because they didn't share any weaknesses. And it can go for the Helping Hand and the Will-O-Wisp, which were really strong, especially into that Glacier at that time. So this was a very, very good Pokemon into the meta. And it actually kind of lasted almost until the double restricted format, where we saw Porygon 2 take over that format next to like that Palkia team and stuff. But this was a really good answer for Zacian as well, which Zacian could not one-shot it, and it could get a Will-O-Wisp or a Trick Room off in front of one, especially if you're paired with that Incineroar, so you get the Fake Out, you get a Trick Room, and you're good to go. The downside was always going to be it never ran Protect, and if it was left by itself, it kind of lost the game, right? All my friends are dead syndrome is something that this Pokemon had big time. In Scarlet and Violet, I've seen this Pokemon a couple of times. People were theorizing it'd be really good with Dark Terror, can't be taunted by those prankster Pokemon anymore, but it just never really panned out. And then we saw the rise of Porygon 2 a lot earlier than we did in Sword and Shield, so this Pokemon has really dropped out of favor. I have not seen one in quite a long time, though I think it still does have some viability, and I do think it's an interesting Pokemon, but Calyrex Shadow Rider is very, very strong, so keep that in mind too. Number 7 is going to be Gastron. This is a Worlds winning Pokemon in 2022. We actually got distribution for it, but it has not really been seen in Scarlet and Violet. Some people have put up some decent results, and you would think with a restricted format, just like it was in 2022, that you would see Gastron more used because Kyogre, right? But the problem is Kyogre has not been very good, so the rise of Gastrodon has not been needed. Water types in general have not been very strong. We've seen a lot of Dondozos and such, but nothing that really is doing anything for to like really warrant the use of Gastrodon on a regular basis. With Terrestrialization, it does get rid of that grass weakness that it had to Rillaboom, which was a big deal in 2022, despite the fact that it did win Worlds. It was really pressured by that Rillaboom, and Rillaboom's usage was actually higher than it is now. So it's interesting that we don't see the Gastrodon, but I just think there's a lot of more tools to deal with it, and it's not really pressuring into the things it needs to be, like Calyrex Shadow or Ice Rider. And even in older formats, it really wasn't doing too much. Even before we had the Rillaboom, we had Meowscarada that really shut this Pokemon down too. So it's just been that kind of Pokemon that's been kind of thrown to the side. You don't want to Terrestrialize it because it's not really doing anything. And if you Terrestrialize it, it is now weak to something else. So it just really hasn't shown up like it did in Sword and Shield, where it was a consistent performer from day one all the way into the World Championships. And yeah, Gastrodon has always been a good Pokemon, but I think it's time to kind of take a back seat, and we'll see next generation if it can do it again. But yeah, I don't think it's winning Worlds this year or next year, but who knows? Maybe somebody figures out a Kyogre team, and then this becomes the best Pokemon against it. It is good against Miraidon too, so keep that in mind. But that is number 7. Number 6 is gonna be Landras Therian. Now, if you played near, I would say 2021 to 2022 of Sword and Shield, this Pokemon was an absolute menace. You couldn't escape this Pokemon from being on a team. It was doing so much, and the amount of damage it was outputting with Terrestrialization was insane. Imagine if they had Clear Amulet back then. This Pokemon would have been absolutely disgusting with max air streams, and then it had Quakes to increase its special defense and your partner's special defense. It was just being really fast, really strong, and boosting up your partners while intimidating the other person. And it was just so strong. You can even use Flutterby to lower the special attack of your opponents too, though that wasn't as common. So, you know, it is what it is. But Landras was very oppressive at a certain time. There weren't really any good ice attackers, so you weren't hitting this thing for 4 times super effective with anything that had stab. And even if you did, it just used the max rockfall, which would just absolutely destroy you anyways. And just it just did so much damage, even with an Intimidate, and it was just not a fun Pokemon to play against. If you were there, you know. And going into Sword and Shield, we saw a couple of results early on with Landras, and that's why he's number 6, or else he would be definitely lower down on the list. But at number 6, he has seen a couple of results. We saw like Justin Tang using this Pokemon to a lot of success, and it's just kind of fallen off. I haven't seen one in a very long time. One of the regionals we looked at, it had like a 2% usage stat, but it had like it was like 39 or 49. No, it definitely wasn't 49. It was like 40, early 40s win-loss ratio, which is really, really bad. Whereas we see Landras I actually taking over the place that Landras T used to sit in. Maybe that's because it's better physical attackers, or maybe that's just because it does a lot more, has more versatility. We thought this Pokemon would be very, very good, considering that now it has Clear Amulet, but like I said, it just never panned out to being what people thought it would be. So that is why he's number 6. Now, number 5 is going to be Regieleki. I thought about putting Regieleki a lot lower on the list as well, because this Pokemon has not shown anything, and this Pokemon was dominant. Though, this is why I say the list could be in a different order. I just think Regieleki still has a chance going into a double restricted format. It's still extremely, extremely fast. It's possible that people just haven't figured out a set for it, and I think it is better than Landras at the moment, especially with Terastallization on its side. Maybe we could see a rise of something like a lot of the teams used to help counter the Rainier Sun teams, which was kind of Electro Web, and we saw screens. Maybe we could see something like that going forward too. And it could take advantage of the Terastallization with like Grass Terra or, you know, Flying Terra. So it can't be hit by those ground attacks, which are its only weakness, though it is a pretty frail Pokemon. So you have to take that into consideration, especially if you're using that Light Clay, you're not going to be able to survive attack. This thing still does a lot of damage, maybe next to Miraidon in a restricted form, a double restricted format. It could be really, really beneficial, especially when you can lower the speed of your opponent's Pokemon to allow your Miraidon to actually get attacks faster. Well, Electro Web actually does a lot of damage too, so maybe we could see the rise of this again. I would put it lower on my list, but I still kind of believe in it a little bit, and I guess we'll have to wait and see on this one. But number 4, we have a Thundurus. Now, in Sword and Shield, I had a terrible, terrible, terrible record facing Thundurus. This Pokemon was just very strong, and I just, personally, like me, I just had a hard time battling against it. I know some people didn't, but this Pokemon was super oppressive. There was a lot of Incineroars in the meta, so this Pokemon was able to take that and make it a defiant, boosted user, whereas in the past, we saw a lot of Prankster with Thunder Wave and maybe some, you know, some other tricks that it could do. But now we're seeing it as a physical attacker that would Terastallize, and it got everything from, you'd use Max Lightning, you would use Dark, you would use Fighting, like Airstream, of course. Like, you would do all these things with your boosted attack to just do massive amounts of damage, really taking advantage of the Defiance. And going into Scarlet and Violet, I thought this Pokemon might revert back to what it was previously, which was that user of the Prankster. But it seems to have not really taken off. I know some people have done some stuff with it, but it really hasn't had a great result. I've tried it personally, and I really did like using the Eerie Impulse builds on it, but it just really felt like it wasn't really participating in the battle sometimes, and it was just left behind. I also used it next to Enamorus, which people thought would be extremely, extremely good. They're both very frail to pretty much the same things, so it also didn't really work out. So Thundurus, extremely oppressive. I would even say at a certain point it was more oppressive than Landras T, and that's why I'm putting it higher on the list. And I never felt like Regieleki was better than this Pokemon, because it just did so much. It just did so much damage. Also gave your team so many buffs, and then it just like would just use Wild Charge and just one-shot your Pokemon, and it was just crazy. This thing was insane. So yeah, Thundurus is at number 4. It still has a chance to be okay in the future, but I just don't think it's ever going to reach anywhere close to what it was in the past, especially. But I'm going to talk Sword and Shield. But number 3, we got Gmax Charizard, or Charizard in general. This Pokemon, Renya Sun, was such a big deal. It won so many tournaments. It was really doing well in the online circuit as well. So it wasn't just like a big game player. It was doing so much. So many good players were using this team. And there were teams built specifically to beat this team because people were like, I'm going to face this team 20 times, you know. So they needed really something strong to really deal with, especially going into the World Championship, which we saw this team do extremely well despite everybody knowing it for the last 3 months and how strong that team was. So that just really shows the power, and the main Pokemon that was using that power was Charizard. Charizard was able to attack, and of course its main Gigantamax attack does a ton of damage in between turns. I think it's 1/8. It could be 1/6. I can't fully remember, but it would just do it to both Pokemon if they weren't fire types. And you could switch and it would still keep doing that damage to the other Pokemon. So essentially you were getting a full knockout of HP from these Pokemon. And the higher the HP of the Pokemon, the more HP it was losing. So Charizard had this. All 3 of the starters had it. So you had Charizard, Venusaur, and Blastoise, and also we had Colossal with it. And these were just doing massive amounts of damage in between turns. So it didn't even really matter how much you were doing directly the first time. And we saw people trying to do Rain to stop this, but then Kyogre would switch in, take this, and then the water spouts weren't doing too much damage. We started seeing people run weakness policies on these Charizards, so they would hit them, so that way they can go for Wildfire. I think it was Gmax Wildfire, right, or something like that. And it would just do massive amounts of damage with the initial hit, and that would switch in the other Pokemon because you probably knocked it out, and then it would just do all that incremental damage every single turn while you're still attacking through their Protect, so they can't even Protect away. It was just really, really brutal, and that team was very strong. But going into Scarlet and Violet, it lost that Gigantamax, obviously, and it didn't really gain anything. It's super frail Pokemon. It doesn't gain anything from going for a Dynamax, so you're not really doing that. I haven't seen one Sun team running this thing. There's just so many better options, especially with the Paradox Pokemon out there now, that Charizard doesn't really have a great place in the meta, and it's been reflected in the results. Though I think it would be a fun Pokemon to use if you want to use it and try to get some wins with it. I think it could be a good time. Try to make Renya Sun, you know, when the double restricted formats start, and see how it goes. So, you know. But, yeah, so Charizard is number 3. Number 2 is some people's biggest surprises. I was not surprised that this Pokemon was not very good, and I thought its counterpart would be much better. That was going into Scarlet and Violet. That wasn't even knowing what was happening now. That was, you know, a year and a half ago I said this, and that is Zacian. This thing got nerfed. Of course, the Intrepid Sword only activates once. Its attack also got decreased to 150, so it is a lot weaker. Intimidate does so much more to this, and of course we have Incineroar out in the meta who's going to do a lot. It also hits it for super effective. It just doesn't output the damage it used to. It's not really hitting too many of the Pokemon for super effective that it needs to be. And we might see a resurgence of this Pokemon going into a double restricted format. But with the hold that this Pokemon had back in Sword and Shield is crazy. We had, I think it was 20 in the world's top cuts of this Pokemon. In like the top 32, I think there was 20 something of these. In the last in the last international, the North America International Championships that we just had, there was 38 total Zacians, and its win percentage was in the 30s. This Pokemon has fallen all the way off. It is not good. It is just so easily countered. even with Dynamax, it's just not outputting the damage. You can go Steel, you can go Fairy, or you can go defensive, and it just doesn't do anything. It's just bad against I don't know how else to explain it. Well, Zamazenta is sitting there being an absolute beast and just doing so much work, especially now that it does have that body press. So Zacian gained nothing. That gained body press, though they both did get nerfed. One came out on top of that, but Zacian was on so many teams. It was on compositions with, you know, Sun. It was on compositions with Rain. It was on, you know, in between teams. It was on Trick Room teams just as a fast option. It just kind of did everything. Its speed in the meta was very, very good, with Calyrex really being the only Pokemon that outspeeds it as a restricted, and of course Regieleki. And sometimes you paired it with Regieleki, so that way you could beat those Calyrex, and it just did so much that it just doesn't do anymore. You switch in one Incineroar, you parting shot it, it's over. You're like, okay, my restricted is just dead in the water. I switch him out, and he's coming back in. He's 150 base attack. You might as well use Karen Black, right? You might as well just use Karen Black because he's just stronger, but. What can you do? This Pokemon has fallen all the way off, but it is not our number one because it can still have a chance in that double restricted format. But we'll get to the number one second. We got some honorable mentions. We got Venusaur, of course. Once again, losing that Gigantamax really hurt it because it can't use that attack. Though I think it's still a pretty decent Pokemon. Nobody's really using it at the moment, but maybe in a double restricted format it might be good. Of course, it gets that Sleep Powder. It can also use stuff like Charm, which is really interesting. So there are some really good things you can do with this Pokemon. And it still hits relatively well with like Leaf Storm and stuff if you want to use it as a supporter. And I think it gets Helping Hands, which is different. Then we have Galarian Moltres. This Pokemon was insane. The reason why it's not on the list is because it has put up a few results. We saw it win a couple of regionals ago, right? Or am I wrong? Am I misremembering that? But it has top cut at least a couple of regionals, and it has done very, very well. So I can't put it on the list because it's still doing work. It's just not doing as much work. And the last Pokemon is going to be that Dragapult, and the reason why I can't put it on the list, it got second at Worlds. It has won a couple of regionals earlier in the game's life cycle. But it really has dropped off. At the beginning of Sword and Shield, this Pokemon was absolutely dominating. There was no other Pokemon like it. It was Dynamaxing. It was Airstreaming. It was whatever the Ghost one was. It was using all that, even the Dark one, to help, because it was a special attacker back then, to help it take KOs and might normally not. And it was just very, very strong. Clear Body's always been really good, and this was just another user of that. Clear Body. We even saw some infiltrators early on being used just to get through any potential mirror matches where they were using substitute, because we did see some of that too. So this Pokemon is really good, but it just hasn't really lived up to that much. Though second at Worlds and stuff, amazing results, but that's why it's in honorable mentions. It's, not close to the top of the list. We're close to being on the list, but it's probably the closest out of a lot of the Pokemon. So, number one, and you might be thinking, okay, well, I thought Zacian was going to be number one. Maybe Regieleki. Charizard, definitely, probably number one. But you guys are forgetting. There was a Pokemon dominated for 6 months, 8 months, a year maybe. I don't even know how long. This Pokemon dominated the meta. Everybody knew the strat and couldn't stop it. They just couldn't. It won 2 Players' Cups in a row. It was piloted by some of the best players and doing well with some players that might not have been known at the time. But this propelled them to the higher ranks. And that is, of course, Colossal. Now, Colossal is an interesting Pokemon, right? It has a 4 times weakness to 2 types, one of those being water. And if it gets hit by a water or fire attack, it gets +6 speed. +6 speed's a lot of speed. But on top of that, there's an item called Weakness Policy. Now you're getting +6 speed and you're getting a +2 special attack or attack. We saw some physical attacker ones, they weren't as good. Why is this important? Well, you hit him with any water attack, he's taking at least half. He doesn't really have good defenses that would help him take those, so use Aqua Jet and stuff like that. It still does pretty significant damage, except if you double your HP, because now you're taking 20% instead of 50%, right? So you are eating these attacks even further. You're becoming the fastest Pokemon on the field, and you're just one-shotting things with your gigantic Volcamax or something like that. I forgot what it was called. And then you're doing the incremental damage between turns. We talked about how Charizard was really doing that. This Pokemon was doing that, but on steroids, because it was so fast, and it was just taking one-shots. And we saw Wolf Glick actually come out with a great set that really helped support this. He would surf with Dragapult to set this up, and then he was able to do screens with that same Dragapult, or he could go with the Urshifu and go for that Aqua Jet. And this Pokemon actually gave a rise to a really interesting Pokemon, and that's Brionne. We saw Brionne being used to do that Aqua Jet. It was like one of the weakest, if not the weakest, Aqua Jet user. That is relatively decent, and it would use Perish Song, so that way at the end, if your Colossal does go down, then you Perish Trap them, because this Pokemon's going to take 1 or 2 KOs by itself, and then your opponent's going to be left with 2 Pokemon while you still have 3, because they have to focus on this Pokemon, or else they're just going to get absolutely destroyed. So after they knock this out, you could just go for the Perish Trap, and you just kind of win that way. Brionne was super bulky, so we've never seen Brionne since or after the rise of Colossal. So that just shows that this Pokemon was able to allow these niche Pokemon to really exist around it, that helped it evolve into such a huge, massive star. And the thing is, everybody knew about this. It's not like this was an uncommon Pokemon to be using at the time. Like I said, for 6 months, even a year, I don't know how long, I don't remember how long that this Pokemon dominated for, but it won Players Cup 1 and 2, and people were using it in between those. People were using it before Players Cup 1, and they were using it after Players Cup. And the only reason why it didn't win Players Cup 3 or Players Cup 4 is because the format was different. It was single and double restricted formats, respectively. And this Pokemon just had no place next when Kyogre was out there, honestly. Kyogre really kind of shut this Pokemon down. You do Follow Me, and then, or, you know, Tailwind. And I think Tailwind, you could just be just faster than Colossal, so you're able to take advantage of that. But Colossal, what has he done in Scarlet and Violet? Absolutely nothing. People were starting to use stuff like that Absorb Bulb or whatever, and then trying to hit with Water Attack, but it just took too much damage, and then it would just get knocked out by your opponent. Like that's all it came down to. People did Grass Terra, but then you couldn't activate the weakness policy if you hit yourself with the water attack, so then you had to hit yourself with the fire attack. It was only 1 time effective, so you were taking significantly less, but then you couldn't use the bulb if you were doing that one. You'd have to use weakness policy. It was just kind of all over the place and just never did anything. Even on online tours, it was just awful. There was just way better options and way better things to be doing. I think there was one team when Chi-Yu came out that was like Lava Plume. It was Lava Plume plus Colossal, and then you get the speed boost, and then you go for rock slides or whatever. It still wasn't very good, especially because Fake Out was a thing, and it was just a mess. And you can only terrestrialize one of them, so usually you're going to terrestrialize the Chi-Yu. But, yeah, this Pokemon was something. It was a Pokemon people didn't really see taking over the meta, and it really did take over the game itself. But if you guys have any Pokemon that should be on this list, let me know down below. And if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys like the video, thumbs it up. And if you're not subscribed, make sure you do so. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, everybody.